Many people say that music is a universal language. If that's the case, I would like to use music as a platform to talk about health. My name is Dr. Moshe Lewis, and I'm a full-time practicing physician who loves music and the way it affects our brains, our bodies, and our well-being. I would like to invite you to tune in where we interview musical artists about health matters that are important to them. But the truth is, we'll be discussing topics that affect all of us. From mental health to body image, cancer screening to stroke, our health is truly our greatest asset. So the goal is to open the dialogue on health to embrace topics that we don't always like to talk about in a way that's raw, candid, and lit. Hopefully these discussions will improve the health of our community. After all, your health matters to me, and if I can make it sound more beautiful, then that's something we should all listen to.
Music and medicine, when you hear those words, how do they speak to your heart?
Music and medicine. Music is medicine. You feel me?
Welcome to Music and Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Moshe Lewis. Really excited today, ecstatic to be joined by musical royalty. Today we have Ed Eckstine with us. Not only is he the son of Billy Eckstine, phenomenal jazz vocalist, but also worked with Quincy Jones and also Clive Davis, and then became the first Black president of a major record label, Mercury Records. So delighted to have you here. You also made the careers of so many people that we love, and we're going to get into that.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah.
My pleasure.
I wanted to, we always do this kind of, just maybe take a walk, although you've gotten a chance since you hung out with us for a bit to hear some of the music, to walk down a memory lane and just put together just a few of my favorite songs that I thought somebody like Ed might like. So just give us a moment to do that.
Cool. Cool.
I'd rather be with you. Yeah.
Uzilla, baby. The world's only rhinestone rock star.
I'd rather be with you. Yeah. Yeah, I'd rather be with you.
If you're worried about where I've been or who I saw, look about into it, my own face, baby, don't worry, you know, baby, if you're worried about where I've been or who
So I know,
Are you guys going to kill me? Was that like the requiem for my life?
I know you didn't technically produce all those
No.
groups, but I
I worked
put
on most
together
of
a
them.
little bit of a collage.
Mhm.
What did you think, or what do you hear when you're listening?
Just many memories come back. You know, first actually, when played Bootsy, I'd Rather Be With You, I think about, you know, I was asked at a recent interview I did of just concerts that, you know, that are memorable. And I remember a P-Funk Bootsy show at the Forum in, I don't know, I'll call it 1980, 81 or something. And it was one of the most amazing moments ever that before Bootsy ever hit the stage, you know, Fred West or Maceo had souped the audience up and the place Forum went absolutely crazy. You could feel the place shaking. And when Bootsy hit the stage, the place went nuts.
I like to bring Maceo to rap real seriously because right now I feel like I'm not on drugs, but I'm full of jokes, if you know what I'm talking about, okay? All right. All right. Ever since the beginning of time, ladies and gentlemen, man has been doing what he can to try to show his affection to woman, show his affection to his specific lady. Sometimes it's done with a kiss. Sometimes it's done with a touch. I just love that smiling face in the early side. Have you seen myself in life so fine? I'd rather be with you.
When I had Brothers Johnson in those days, we did a lot of shows together. And Bootsy was one of the most amazing experiences ever, watching the phenomenon of Bootsy at the time. A number of things came. Obviously, hearing Patty and James doing Baby Come to Me was just a record that went through a lot of machinations and gesticulations to get it to the hit that it ultimately became. And it really sort of celebrates the genius of Rod Temperton as a writer in that period. And so many of the others that you played. I mean, Tony's Baby Doll, because this next weekend, a week from tomorrow, actually, I'm going up to Oakland for the memorial service and celebration of life for Dwayne Wiggins, you know, 1/3 of the Tony. So just great. Thank you, man. It was pleasant memories, all of them.
Absolutely. And we were talking about that sort of offline a little bit. I think that many times the public may not realize sort of what's going on behind the scenes at the executive level to help us get these soundtracks of our lives. Tell us about some of that uniqueness that you bring, because like you've said so many times, you're a musician's son, so you really hear and can feel artists, even if you don't always have the ability to make everything a hit.
Yeah. Being raised an artist kid, I always said that, you know, in our family, artist stuff was talked about around the dinner table. If your dad was a plumber or a teacher, whatever, plumber and teacher stuff got talked about around the table. In our household, it was showbiz very often, you know, and developed sort of a sensibility and a notion of the old Duke Ellington line about there's only two kinds of music, good and bad. And Pop's really sort of adhered to that notion and sort of taught us that, you know, good and bad is all relative to what, you know, whatever your particular taste buds are. And doing what I was doing on an executive level, there's a certain amount of which I was fortunate to work for Quincy for a long time, was learned from him that, you know, that is kind of relative. And also sort of processed through a blender of having an awareness of the commercial marketplace, you know? And if you're trying to make a record that's hopefully going to get on the radio and sell records at the time, you have to be, you know, as a creative person who's bringing talent to a label into a situation, giving birth to it, as it were, you have to be cognizant of what's marketable, you know, and what can and cannot sell. So because I was a consumer first, as well as being, you know, like I said, my dad's kid, I never felt that my commercial taste buds were that far removed from those that I was trying to ultimately sell records to and have the acts appeal to. So,
And did you sense a lot of it not only from hearing when you were growing up, but also going out? You spent so much of your time and continue to, I know, listening to music, listening to artists, giving people a chance, even if it's maybe outside of your, you know, genre or specialty. You're open to everything.
Yeah, I do. In answer to the question, because for me, my three older brothers are 10, 8, and 6 years older than me. and the four of us grew up in the same room in bunk beds. And so, when I was, I'll say for conversation, when I was 3, my brother, who's 10 years older, was a teenager,
Right.
So, and I'm born in 1953. So by 1956, 57 is, Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino, the bird groups of the time, the Orioles, the Falcons, all these different bands, and then a variety of girl groups. So as a young kid, I was hearing all these records that my brothers were listening to, and it's sort of indelibly stamped my brain in a lot of ways. And then in 1962, Motown, ostensibly in 1964 is the Beatles. So I was fortunate because I was around when the big boom happened, when it all initially exploded. I was there as a kid, and it had an amazing impact on my life. And I knew at a pretty young age that this is what I wanted to do. I basically had 2 hopes and dreams during the course of my young life. I either wanted to pitch for the Dodgers,
Right.
or I wanted to be in the music business, and ultimately music business won for a variety of reasons.
Sure. You're very good with your stories. Paint for us sort of what that time was like being in Encino, pretty much maybe the first black band,
We were.
even before the
Mhm.
Jacksons got here, and just growing up, sort of, it was very different back then.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. My father first moved to Encino in 1947. When Ventura Boulevard was basically a 2-lane dirt road with nothing but orange trees and walnut groves. And there were like 4 other families living there. Then Clark Gable lived in what's now known as Clark Gable Estates. John Wayne lived a part of at Rancho and in Louise, the big house up on the hill. There were Elia Kazan, the blacklisted writer of they call on the waterfront. He lived across the street from Pops, and then there was like an insurance guy lived at the top of the hill. So when Dad first moved there, like I said, he was the only black person there. And as for us as kids, when I was born, my parents had moved to Hollywood by then. So when we were building our house here in Encino that we all grew up in. And ultimately, when we first went to school, between my brothers and I, every year there would be some kid who would decide he was going to call one of us, and and we'd end up punching him in the face, kicking somebody's ass, because we knew the law was laid down pretty evidently from day one that if you don't defend yourself in that environment, you're gonna hear from him when you get home, which meant Pops is gonna be knee deep. So yeah, there was a fair share of that, and then you end up smacking somebody in the head, and then you get sent to the principal's office, and then inevitably it was, we're going to call your parents. And I just looked at him and said, "You do not want my mom coming down here. You don't want Carol Eckstine, bringing Thomaston, Georgia down here and when you're trying to tell her what we can and cannot do." And so they would, they'd do it, and then Mom would immediately set them straight on everything. So we'd have our moments. Inevitably, that would happen once a year, and then the word would spread as leave the alone. They're going to smack you upside your head. And we did. And, but, the environment was interesting because for me, my musical stimuli, other than, what was getting played in the house and what Pops, when we'd go hang out with Dad on the road or whatever, my stimuli was more environmental about what I was around, So on a certain level, I was more initially stimulated and informed by rock than I was by so-called traditional black forms, R&B or whatever. And eventually I grew to, have a love of all of it. So I had pretty wide, breadth of knowledge of music. And when I started playing guitar at a certain point, I fell in love with guitar players, be it blues players, rock players, whatever the case may be, So that was really it more than anything else.
Sure. Talk to us a little bit about just when you're first getting started. A lot of people think, his dad was a famous musician. The road was paved with gold to him being an executive, when in reality, you started writing before you were even getting credit and really worked your way up.
Yeah. When I flamed out of public middle school here, because there was a time when I went to a place called Portola Junior High School in Tarzana. And one day, the boys' vice principal of the school, a man called Billy Dan Jones, called my parents in. They said, we'd love for you to come in and have a chat with us about Eddie. And so my parents went down, and Mr. Jones apparently tells my parents, the good news is Eddie's a very smart kid. The bad news is he knows it. And and I was cutting classes a lot, and doing other shit, because in those days, this public school had 3 periods of lunch, like say 4th period lunch, 5th period lunch, 6th period lunch. My 2 best friends were twins, and one of the twins had 4th period lunch. The other twin had 6th period lunch. I had 5th period lunch, which meant no matter what was happening between 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, just sort of cut those classes. And so I wasn't showing up. And my parents decided at that point they were going to do something about it. So I got shipped off to a all-boys boarding school in Western Pennsylvania, 40 miles east of Pittsburgh, a place called the Kiski School. And I was there from 9th to 12th grade, 1967 to 1971. And it was quite an interesting environment because it forced me at the time I was clearly full of shit, excuse my French. I would do whatever I could to sort of sidestep, any sense of regimen or responsibility. And this school, like I said, we went to school 6 days a week, coat and tie to all classes and meals, half day of school on Wednesday, half day of school on Saturday. Teachers lived on campus. So and mandatory study hall at night. So the whole deal was that, at the end of a particular day's studies, the teacher said, if you didn't understand, you better be at their apartment at night to get some additional help. My freshman year, I had an English teacher who ended up being a very pivotal person in my life, my writing and my appreciation of the language of English, period, who recognized my bullshit quite early. He called bullshit on me immediately. And he told me at one point, literally the second day I was in his class, he said, I'm telling you right now, he said, if we go through something today and you're not in my apartment that night asking me about it, you're the first person I'm going to call on tomorrow. And if you don't have the answer, if you try to dance your way through it, we had a demerit system at the school, which, enabled you to leave or not leave campus on certain weekends. He said, I'll bust you for it, So he forced me to take shit seriously that I wasn't taking seriously. And I hated it while I was going through it. But, the further it gets in my rearview mirror, the more important it has become and pivotally important in my life. So.
Sure. How'd you get into sort of the music scene while you're in Boston?
In Boston, Boston was when I went to college. After I graduated from the boarding school, which was called Kiski, after I graduated from Kiski, I didn't want to go to college right away. I wanted to take the proverbial bridge year, because the Kiski environment was kind of like college in its own way. It was very highly regimented environment. I didn't want to go to college. I wanted the bridge year. And my parents kind of weren't having that because, black parents of, late 60s going into the early 70s, and they were of a certain generation. And they were smart enough to realize with me that bridge year probably meant I was never going to go back to college, You're going to go to Europe and do it? Oh, hell no, you're going to college. So for me, although I loved my parents dearly, I wanted to just get as far away from California as possible. And so I had done enough research to realize that Boston, clearly great schools were there, and it was far enough away, and it was a lot of music in the environment. So I got to Boston and basically, just continued my love of records, listening to the radio a lot. There a pivotal rock station in Boston at the time was called WBCN, still is. And I sort of paid a lot of attention to BCN. And I had a friend who was a college rep for one of the labels, which basically ostensibly meant, that person his responsibility was to, put records on the radios at the college stations. And he also would cover sometimes for his local promotion guy who would deal with the big stations, bigger radio stations. So I started hanging out with him, just going to radio just to see what it was, to get the environment. And one day my man got a little too high and too drunk the night before and couldn't show up and make the gig. So he asked me when I go out to the airport, because I'd hung with him enough to know what his gig was, asked me when I go out to the airport and pick up an act that was coming into town to do a series of shows, and they had a radio show to do that night at BCN at one of the radio stations. Would I show up and, and be there to be that guy as his rep, and he would catch up with me later in the day. And so the act was an act at the time called Kenny Loggins featuring Jim Messina sitting in, who ultimately became Loggins and Messina. And they were playing a series of shows in the Boston area, opening for Billy Preston. And Billy Preston's guitar player and bass player at the time were George and Louis Johnson, who also ended up working with down the road as the Brothers Johnson. So, that was kind of my first lick of sin, as it were. I got around the music, got around artists, got around the game and how it was played and what was going on. I just, learned a bit and I was taken, And then after Boston, after I I had other priorities than going to school when I was in college in Boston. Let's just say, and my priorities were doing my music hustle, and I always said that during that period of time, I went to the University of Rolling Stone and other music magazines. That's where I sort of learned the game and what was going on in the business and that kind of stuff. And, to spend too much time in a classroom was not what I was trying to do. And in Boston, I had my roommate and I, who had been my roommate in prep school for 2 years prep school, he and I had this running bit that as you open our dorm window, our curtains in the morning, you look across the Charles River into Cambridge, and there was time and temperature on a Coca-Cola bottling factory. So it'd open it and say, whatever, 8:05, shit, we're late.
Sure.
11 degrees, too cold, not going anyway. Close the curtain, get back in the bed. And so my grades were directly affected by how cold it was outside. So when my grades came home at the end of the year and I had, whatever, a B, 4 Ds and 2 incompletes, let's just say my parents weren't having that. And so I got back here and, enrolled at Pierce College for a summer, and then went to SC for a semester, USC for a semester. And there's music business, here I come.
Right.
One of my friends growing up in Encino was a guy called David Guest. David lives in a certain amount of infamy with people who follow stuff in the media because he was a guy at a certain point who married Liza Minnelli. And then folks in the UK knew him because he became a reality TV star over there. And so David and I had not similar tastes, but similar interests in music and records. David liked girl groups and stuff like that, whereas I was more into rock stuff and the blues. And we used to hang a lot, and we had this sort of pact with each other that whoever sort of got on first would pull the other along. So David was doing a great deal of writing at the time for different publications, and specifically Soul Magazine, Regina Jones. And in those days, in the music business, the press got an enormous amount of attention here in town. So I would tag along with David to shows that he was assigned to do reviews for. The dirty little secret was David couldn't write, and I could because I'd gone to Kiski, and that was, the headmaster at Kiski was an English teacher. So if there was one thing that they wanted, is that every guy who graduated from that school could write in some way, shape, or form. So I was writing David's pieces, it wasn't like it was James Baldwin,
Right.
They're just reviews and shit like that. But there was a particular point where David had gotten a gig with London Records out here to do press for Al Green, amongst others. And he went into Soul one day and brought me with him to tell Regina and the editor at the time that he was leaving to go take this job in the record business. And they were, "Oh, David, don't leave. We like your stuff, blah, 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 blah." And he said, "Really? You like my stuff? Meet the guy who's been writing it for the last 18 months and interstage left at Eckstine." So, what? And all those things. So Regina gave me a couple of things to write. I guess I got assigned to do a Sarah Vaughan and Freddie Hubbard review from the Troubadour, and I wrote it, and she apparently liked it. And next thing I knew, I was, getting paid 8 cents a printed line to write more or less an entire issue of the magazine. And I made all of like $28.30. I still have the stub for the check somewhere. And I realized quickly, I said, probably not going to get rich and be able to get out of mom and dad's house on this $28.30 a month, So I was doing a few other things at the time, writing, and I got a call from, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Should I just go? I got a call from 2 publicists at A&M Records at the time, a woman named Dee Dee McNeil and another woman named Billy Spencer, asking me would I be interested in hearing an album that Quincy Jones had just finished called Body Heat.
Right.
And would I consider writing about it as a cover story for this other magazine that I was editing at the time? And I'd known Quincy since I was a kid because of his relationship with my pops. I said, yeah, let me hear the record. So they sent me the record. I absolutely loved it. They used some of my quotes from my review of the record as the pull quotes for the ads and stuff like that. So, I thought I was Ralph Gleason or something, Norman Mailer. So shortly thereafter, they called and said, would you like to interview Q? I said, yeah, sure. So he gave me his number. I called him. He was like, hey, man, how you doing? He hadn't seen me since I was like 11 or 12 years old. And so whatever I'm at this time, 19 or 20. He said, come on down to A&M Records lot, because at the time, Disneyland used to do big band gigs on the summer nights on the Tomorrowland stage.
Right.
And he said his band was going to be playing a big band gig down at Disneyland, and many of the members of his band at the time were guys who had been either in Basie's band or Ellington's band, Lionel Hampton, contemporaries of my father's. A lot of those guys had moved out here west to be in the Johnny Carson Orchestra or Merv Griffin Orchestra and various TV shows. So many of those guys, if they knew my mom and my dad, and some of them remembered me from when I was born, because when I was initially born, being my mom and dad's first child, it became a big issue for them. So I turned up at he told me to turn up at A&M on a Friday night at 6 o'clock. I turned up Friday night at 6:20 or 6:30. Of course, I was late. You know how your people are. And so I turn up late. And when I get there, I got an afro this big. I'm a tall guy anyway. I'm wearing like ridiculous platform boots. And Quincy, stands up and tells all the guys, man, you know who this is? You hear a couple of old guys in the back, and now we don't know who the big head is, but he's late. I know that much. And Jones said, yeah, he said, this is B and Carol's son. And then one of the guys in the band goes, you got to be kidding me. Because my family nickname is Bugs. So they knew me as Bugs. Is that little Bugs? I said, man, I remember when you were no more than a conversation. We were on the road with Basie, and B said, yeah, man, I'm going to go upstairs and get on this big Georgia girl and make me a son. And here I was. So Jones and I went down to Disneyland, sat backstage, just talked pretty much all evening. Didn't really do the interview. Just he wanted to hear about what had gone on in my life at that point. Right. Told me the next day to come by the crib. He lived in Brentwood at the time, ironically 3 doors down from what ultimately became in infamy OJ's house on Rockingham. Right. So I went to the crib on Saturday around noon. We sat out in his studio for 12 hours, just hanging, bullshitting, didn't do the interview. Told me to come back. He was married to Peggy then. So food had piled up outside. The plates of food were piled up outside the door. We're just sitting there kicking it, smoking weed and whatever, kicking it. And then Sunday, he said, come back and do it again. Sunday, I came back and did it again. And I realized by the end of the day on Sunday, at a certain point, he asked me, what did I want to do? And, I'm 18, 19 years old, and I was in world domination mode. I want to take over the world. I want to king of the world. Save it. So I want to do X, Y, and Z and all these things. And one of the things I said that I wanted to do was produce records. And he stops me in my tracks and says, we already have somebody here who does that, meaning him. Right. So you're going to have to do something else, And I realized at a certain point while I was there to interview him, he was really interviewing me, because the record Body Heat was a career change for him. Okay. He was moving out of his big band phase and out of film score phase into a more sort of small band R&B / synthesizer phase. As he said at the time, he said, I go to work every day writing these big arrangements, but when I'm going home at night, this is 1973, he said, I'm going home at night listening to Stevie, Earth, Wind and Fire, Rufus and Chaka, Kool and the Gang, whatever. He said, but I don't feel like I'm being true to my musical soul, because what I'm really feeling are these records, but I'm doing this. So I'm getting ready to make this change. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to start this production company. I want to start developing young talent, blah, blah, blah. Sure. So do you want to come to work for me? So at the time I was, like I say, getting 8 cents a line, writing for Soul, pumping gas at an Arco station on the corner of Balboa and Ventura. So I thought for a millisecond, said, sure. So I turned up he said, be at the office on Monday at 10 o'clock. So I turned up at the office. I was living in Santa Monica then with a buddy of mine. So I hitchhiked from Santa Monica to La Brea and Sunset and was in the office at 10 o'clock Monday morning. And ended up staying with him for 12 years.
Sure. What's the story about Quincy or a side of him that you feel a lot of people don't know?
Well, that he was funny as hell. Smart. Everybody knows he was smart. He's extremely astute businessman. I used to always say about Q is that he was the most highly evolved artist as businessman that I had ever encountered at that point, and for years, probably ever. And that if any room that he was in had to have 2 doors in it, an artist door and the businessman door. And 98 times out of 100, he's going to go through the artist door. But the times he decides to go through the business door, he's going to make great decisions and have, fully realized notions. Stuff that people don't know. I don't know. His life has been so well documented. I think they do know it. For me, it was always, just his sense of wonder, his sense of organization. Because he taught me a lot about that. Because, like I said, I was a kid and I was a bit of a knucklehead. And he used to always say, write it down, Edward, write it down, because I wasn't writing shit down. It's all up here, don't worry about it, I got it. This is steel chest, and that's not going anywhere. Write it down. So I learned how to start writing stuff down, taking stuff seriously. I didn't take stuff as seriously ultimately as I probably should have, because there were things that I didn't do as well as I would like to have. But I learned a lot. Many of the things that that I learned, I tried to do as he said, or did do as he did, but not always as he said. So.
You also, besides just doing publicity, did management. Talk to us about the challenges of managing a group like Brothers Johnson, because when we hear it and look at it from the outside, we see this amazingly talented group, and we're like, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
But I know you were right there.
Management in some levels is, grown-up daycare. And at a certain point of that, lost its charm for me. And I was never really cut out for that, But to be a part of the strategy of artists' careers was always interesting to me, having the ability to sit and strategize, hear stuff early in its embryonic stages because of your relationship with the artist. And then once the record's going through its process and then you're done and you've got to go do what you have to do with it to present it to the marketplace, was always an enormous opportunity that I loved very much. The hand-holding, not always so much. And although I was never really formally called manager in the case of the brothers, we started a management company that was called Mellow Management, and it was my responsibility to look after them. So I was really kind of, super duper product manager, publicist, all around, right hand. And to a certain extent, to sort of call me manager was a bit of a stretch because those guys and I were all the same age, so they're only going to take me so seriously when I'm like, dude, you got to do this. You're like, no, fuck you. So a lot of the stuff when it was, dude, you got to do, I've filtered it through Quincy, and Quincy always, or tried on a number of occasions, to bring in what I called a responsible adult to sort of put guardrails around me because I was buck wild at that age, and each and every one of those people that somehow ended up in the company to do whatever it is they were assigned to do, but also to kind of, put guardrails up around me, ended up dying cruel and ugly deaths in our organization because, I was a solo act, I wasn't a duo. And I did my best to undermine, in many cases, those that were brought in to, quell my instincts.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who do you feel was a really great success and easy to work with during the time you were there?
With Q?
Uh-huh.
Well, obviously the Michael Jackson records. But the brothers were really successful. It was 4 platinum records, a couple multi-platinums, and a bunch of hit singles. Jones's solo records did extremely well. Body Heat, Mellow Madness, Sounds and stuff like that. And the Dude, obviously the year that he won all those Grammys. In my Polygram iteration, stuff like the Tonys, Toni, Vanessa Williams, Brian McKnight, Robin Harris. Unfortunately, we lost Robin before I thought the star that had potential to shine dissipated, but evaporated with his transition. But I was blessed because a lot of the things that I worked on that I was fortunate to be a part of, either things that I worked on when I worked for Q or the things that I did, when I moved on to other pastures, were all pretty successful.
Sure. How do you juggle the artist's expectations from what business may dictate? They want to do a certain song. They want it to be in the one release. You guys don't agree.
Wow. That's the that's the great thing, is I have a relationship with USC's Thornton School of Music where I've been working as a mentor to some students there. And just yesterday I was with my mentees, and one of the kids aspires to be a manager. And he was asking me a similar question. I said, one thing that I learned in my years of doing every version of what I've done in my career is that as managers, sort of the running bit that tends to happen is people say manager, is that you should be a cheerleader for your artist, but a cheerleader based in reality. You know, that if I'm going to be on the basketball court with Shaq trying to dunk on his ass, you can cheer for me all you want, but it ain't going to happen. You know, there's got to be a certain reality where somebody's got to step to me and go, dude, you may want to work on that jump shot because you're not going to slam the ball. There's things that happen at times with young managers in the process of trying to deliver for their artists that are just unrealistic. It ain't going to happen. And the whole notion initially is not going to happen. So you have to take a dose of reality before you approach anything in doing it. I was fortunate that I kind of learned about reality pretty quickly, you know, because I had relationships with people. I tried to have as wide a breadth of knowledge as I possibly could have in the environment, you know, so that if I was going to talk to promotion people, read, talk to promotion people or salespeople in record companies, I had a sense of what it is that they were up against. You know, I didn't go running into the promotion department screaming about why wasn't this R&B record getting played at pop radio, when I understood what the machinations were, whether I agreed with them or not, about what it took to put certain records on the format at the time, you know. And nothing alienates a manager from the record marketing environment than coming in and being completely unrealistic about shit. You know, there's times when you're unrealistic about things that, you know, that if you could prove your point and make it make sense. I mean, case in point being Vanessa Williams. When I initially signed her and we did her first record, The Right Stuff, the song The Right Stuff was blowing up. And I couldn't get I wasn't getting a rise at all out of the promotion department on the pop side at Polygram at the time, because it was still in the wake of the whole Miss America controversy relative to her. And I remember having a conversation in a marketing meeting where I sort of blew up the room. In blowing up the room, ostensibly what I said was, I got a record that's in the marketplace blowing up. You guys have nothing to do with the fact that it's blowing up right now. It's, you know, it's what we've been doing to make it happen in R&B. The record's ready to cross pop, and you're doing nothing with it. And part of the reason why you're doing nothing with it is because you're embarrassed when people say to you, who's on your label, you'll say, oh, Bon Jovi, this one, that one, this and that one. Vanessa Williams. You don't want to say her name because you know that person that has asked you that question will immediately launch into, oh, Vanessa the Undress and all that stupid shit at the time. I said, and you don't want to say it. I said, and reality of it is, when I signed her initially, one of the things that was my sort of guiding light or inspiration, if you will, at the time was I knew that I could go out and find fill in the blank young black female vocalist, Susie Jones, for the sake of conversation, that nobody knows, or Vanessa Williams, a name that everybody knew. And it was incumbent upon me as a record maker to go make the right record and to understand that the marketplace if I made the right record, where we were going to go get her started from a marketing standpoint, was black radio. And after all the shit that she had gone through relative to the controversy, I knew that if anything, that when we as black folk go through whatever we go through, as far as controversy on the black side, that we welcome back with open, come on home, baby, we got you. Right. I knew if I made that right record, the come on home, baby, we got you was going to be cool. And I also knew that I call Vanessa V, that if V was put in front of people at radio or whatever, she could go. Nobody sold her like her. I mean, she had to go sell herself as a black woman to the junior leagues of America as Miss America. You know, she did that part, you know, very well. So I knew what I had, and these folks weren't buying. You know, I couldn't make the sale, and ultimately, like I said, I raised enough hell, and eventually, I got what I wanted. You know, it should happen.
You brought up format. That comes up a lot. How does that change, and how often? Because so many times people feel like, okay, you know, we'll just say Susie Jones to not insult anybody every single day for 6 months, 8 months, and things like that, and it oversaturates the song.
Mm-hmm. I'd say a lot of ways what caused that saturation is because the corporatization of radio. There was a point where, case in point, Toni. If I had a dime for every time someone has said to me at some point after they heard Toni's second record, The Revival, the album that had Feels Good on it, and It Never Rains, or the third record, Sons of Soul, because the singles were so big, those records got played forever. Right. And in the Brothers Johnson case, when we released the first album, Look Out for Number One, the album that had I'll Be Good to You and Get the Funk Out of My Face, those songs, black radio stations were going 4 and 5 cuts deep on an album at that point. So you as a consumer would turn on the radio station, you'd hear the single, and it's, oh, that's cool. And then you'd hear something, oh, that's him. Oh, that's him.
Right.
You'd go buy the album. But in the case of, I'll say, with the Tonys, you were hearing Feels Good so much, they played it what I call brainwash rotation, played it to the point where you're like, if I hear this record again, I'm going to shoot myself in the head, you know?
Right.
And then many times people would come to me, oh, man, I didn't realize that was them. I love that record. It took me like a year and a half to realize I loved the record, you know, before they bought it. So that was a byproduct of a lot of just corporatization, where everything was about call-out research. Do you recognize this record? They play, 3 seconds of it. You know what that is. There was no artist loyalty. It was record loyalty to sell soap, sell advertising. And I realized at a certain point that, radio stations, we as record people at the time liked to think that they were there to help us sell artists. They weren't there to help us sell artists. They were there we made records for them to sell advertising, That was the reality of our existence at the time. So it certainly got frustrating. It became very anti-artist. There was a certain point where the anti-artist sort of vibe kicked in, although not overt, but it was just the reality of radio's existence. It became more corporatized.
Sure. Fast forwarding to today, what are some of those tips that you might give artists? Because it almost seems like they have to come with the complete package. Social media's got to be on tip. They've got to be branded. They've got to be essentially marketable and ready to sell tomorrow, and prove that they're selling or moving so much product that a lot of times the numbers are, everybody knows, all fake.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in this DIY age of the music business that we currently live in, there was a whole strata that was cut out of the birth of the cake of the business. And some of that strata was, mid-level management, creative A&R people like that. And I think one of the great misnomers is that a number of the people who were in the creative sector and certain other sectors of the record companies was that as much as we were fans, many were sort of aspiring artists who realized that, I wasn't going to be blah, 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 but I had a valid role that I could play in that environment, and when corporatization really sort of took hold in the music business, a lot of that level of people got blown out. And in the DIY age, I would say there's a reason why some of us existed. I could do things that you couldn't do. You could do a lot of things that I couldn't do, but the role that I played was important to certain artists' careers, and when that got cut out, they were kind of listening to, or when the world became American Idol, that became a scary kind of notion, that with all due respect, that Joe Average was picking what records were, what artists were hits and all that, because truth is, as you look back on in this whole age of The Voice, American Idol, et cetera, there's really been 3 successful artists, Kelly Clarkson, Carrie Underwood, and Jennifer Hudson, and Jennifer it's because she morphed into other things, that's a long time. And a lot of artists have gone through that process,
Right.
And a lot of music's gotten released that, just was fast food music, nothing there, no real sense of development there, so.
Do you sense a challenge if we see that we're going back to an era of controversy and fight, right? We were saw with Tupac and Biggie, now we're seeing with Drake and Kendrick. Do you think that that's just helpful publicity and promotion, or it's really ultimately bad?
I think it's okay as long as mugs don't start shooting each other, But the back and forth thing is cool, I think Kendrick clearly won that battle. But yeah, a little controversy never hurt anybody. I would love to see, especially in these times that we live in right now, I'd love to see things the artist community get a little more political, be a little more vocal about their politics. It just seems to me that, I guess because it's also new right now, that there's a significant amount of just protecting my neck, protecting my own, as opposed to standing up and saying something, whereas in the era that I grew up musically, and the music that inspired me in a lot of levels was things that were, that were saying something, be it Stevie.
Oh, so long for this night I prayed that a star would guide you my way.
to share with me this special day. Well, ribbons in the sky for our love. If allowed, may I touch your hand? And if please, may I once again?
Obviously, be it Bob Dylan, people like that, Gil Scott-Heron, Gamble and Huff, there was, perspective and a point of view politically,
If there was a direction that you wanted some of the current execs, whatever minor label or major label they may be at, to sort of take to really address sort of what the world seems like they're looking for, which is certainly not always the biggest artist, always be on the biggest platforms, but to really give a voice to artists that are coming up, artists that have talent, what type of advice would you give them?
Wow. Pay attention to substance, have a perspective and point of view about the substance. If it's just, kind of confectionery music, judge it for what it is. There's something to be said for that. I love a dumb pop record like anybody, but try to find some things that have some substance to them, there's just a lot of, as I call it, fast food music out there these days, not to sound like an old man, but I guess maybe I am. But there's something to be said for. A friend of mine is working on a Gil Scott-Heron documentary, and I was looking at the trailer that he's done for it, what they call sizzle reel, what he's done for the film, and God, do we need a voice like Gil right now? So but just the perspective and point of view politically and socially, in terms of the impact of what's being said. And there are some, but they're not getting the light and the shine that they should. Yeah,
Sure.
that's what I'd say.
Last year of controversy that comes up, the music industry sometimes also gets criticism for not policing itself, whether we allow people to get away with, teenage girls or things of that nature. It seems to kind of go back to mafia roots that really allow a lot of crime, scandal, sex, drugs, and rock and roll to get out of control. Diddy is a case in point. What do you think kind of needs to happen to really kind of definitely protect the artists, but also maybe the managers themselves?
Yeah, I'm not an advocate for censorship, but I am an advocate for smart decisions. Sitting down and saying, "Do you really want to say this? Is this what you're really trying to say here? Think about how it's going to be impacted." My daughter and I. My daughter's 32 now, but when she was in middle school and high school, in the mornings when I would drive her to her bus for school, I let her control the radio, control the music that we listened to, because I was trying not to be one of those dads, turn that shit off, So we're listening to something on the radio at the time, Power 106 here in LA, and I forget which rapper it was, or I'll politely say I forget which rapper it was, and part of the message in a particular song was, I ain't conversating with no hoes and I'm not hitting. That's not a direct quote, but that's kind of the essence of what it was. And, my daughter's shaking her head and, bobbing her head and shaking her ass while she's listening. And I look over and I said, "You realize what he said? Are you listening to what he's saying?" And she said, "Yeah, I hear." I said, "Do you realize that there's part of the audience who's listening to this are the men in the dating pool that you're now a part of, who may sort of take that to heart, realize what you're listening to, and that kind of stuff would be the things that, like I said, I'm not into censorship, but clearly whoever that artist was, I'd had the conversation, dude, you sure you want to say that?" So.
Yeah, got it. So since you brought her up, I know she's got a book out, and I hear you've got a book in the works. So tell us about both.
I'll talk about my daughter first. This is her book. It's called Junie. Called Junie by Aaron Crosby Eckstine. Aaron is a 32-year-old author living in Brooklyn who got her undergraduate degree from Barnard College in New York, Columbia University. And once she graduated from Barnard, went to work for a Park Avenue branding and marketing firm to be an account executive in the corporate world. And she was getting some shine, starting to blow up a little bit. came home for Christmas that year. And we talked about it. I said, she told me what she was doing. I was, oh, that's great. I was really happy for her. She goes, yeah, Dad, it's great that they love me, but I don't love it. And that's the part of the movie where it goes, wah, wah. They love me and I don't love that. So really, what are you going to do? She said, well, I'm thinking about this during the time that all the media was about how we as a country were failing our students in the public school system in terms of education. I said, what do you want to do? She said, I think I want to teach. And my daughter's always kind of been a save the world kid from that standpoint. And I said, what are you going to do? She said, I think I'm going back to school and get my master's and get my teaching degree. So she ended up going to Stanford, got her master's from Stanford, and became one of her mentors at Stanford was the woman who would have been Hillary Clinton's Secretary of Education, whose name escapes me right now. Secretary of Education had Trump not won. And so she took my daughter under her wing. And at the time, Erin was student teaching up in Silicon Valley while she was at Stanford. And she loved the kids, she said, but the environment was a little too homogeneous for her. And she was looking for something with a little more soul,
Right.
a little more color, quote unquote, diversity. So she aggressively pursued a situation in Brooklyn and became a teacher at a high school called the Brooklyn Prospect Academy. And she taught 9th grade and 12th grade English from, I don't know, for the past 6.5, 7 years. Did really well. And the kids, she was kind of like big sister to a lot of the kids because she was, pretty much a similar generation, loved the same music. She'd go to shows and kids would see her at so-and-so show and say, what are you doing here? And see their English teacher at whatever, fill in the blank show. So she did that. And then like I said, when she decided to transition out of the corporate game, she said to me, I have this idea for a book that I want to work on based upon stories that her maternal grandmother had told her, because her maternal family is from Alabama. So she said, I got this idea for this book that I'm going to work on, blah, 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 blah. So during COVID, she was, teaching, remotely by day, and at night she started buckled down, started writing the book. And then couple that with, I don't know, somewhere along the way there, she was on Twitter, pre-X. She was on Twitter, and there was a post from a particular person who said, I'm an agent, a book agent. I said, I'm looking for young writers of color. If you have a couple of chapters that you'd like somebody in the industry to read, please forward them to me. So she forwarded 2 chapters to this woman. And the woman went nuts for this is great, blah, 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 one of those things. I love what she did. Send me some more. So she sent her 2 more chapters. Next thing you know, the woman's like, this is great. I want to publish your book. And it turns out the woman ran an agency, a major agency that I guess some of the writers that she represented in her agency were people whose texts Erin used while she was teaching her classes. Right. So I use the analogy, it's kind of like if somebody in the music business, years ago had found online Clive Davis or Jimmy Iovine and had sent a note saying, could you send me a couple of songs? My daughter had no idea who these people were, And so she did, and ended up signing with the woman's agency. And then once they took the book to market, it got a great deal of attention initially. So she signed with Random House, and a year ago, it was determined that it was to be the February 2024 Good Morning America Book Club Book of the Month for February, which is what it was. It just did that. And it's out and off and running, So she's recently signed with CAA to represent her for other platforms. So really proud of her. Book's doing well, her first book. And she actually just turned in her second book. And her editors are in the process of tightening it up.
Sounds good.
That's that.
Right. And you've got something.
And I'm working on mine. I like to say part and parcel to hers when I cut out part of the Erin story just now, which was there was a point when when they said we want to take it to the marketplace now, they apparently went to what they call auction, and then she called the house on a Friday and said, it's going to auction on Monday, blah, blah, blah. What do you think you're going to get? I said, what do you think you're getting? I hope I get, 1 guaranteed with an option for the second, and enough money so I can walk away from teaching and just write for the next year. And so that's cool. So numbers are pretty good. And so she calls back on Monday morning, and she was kind of meek when she called. My wife's name is Wendy. She says, can you put Wendy on the phone? I said, yeah, sure. So I did. Told her what happened. Money was off the charts. It's too firm, money off the charts. I was like, oh, shit. I immediately sat down and I said, let me start writing my book. So I taught her how to write. And
she had it from my genes.
Yeah. So I started working on mine, which is, a collection of stories, essays, just, close encounters of the showbiz kind, as I like to say, that I've had a propensity over the years for situations where if I'm in a meeting or doing something and there happens to be a lull in the action, there were people who were either part of my team at the time would say, "Hey, Ed, tell the so-and-so story," So I'd tell that story. So a number of those stories are, kind of what I've documented in my book. I'm probably, I don't know, 60% done right now. So saga continues.
Our show's called Music and Medicine. When you hear those words, music and medicine, as a teacher as well, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, it means a lot, actually, because music for me was is the opiate and salve for my soul and my spirit, and has been my entire life. Obviously, from the family standpoint of growing up hearing music around the house all the time, mom and pops playing stuff, to my older brothers playing stuff in the room, to at a certain me falling asleep at night with the radio on. I'm a child of LA radio. Hearing things on the radio. I still remember vividly the first time I heard little Stevie, quote unquote, little Stevie Wonder fingertips on the radio, on KGFJ here in LA, when the jock said, that was what he was, 11-year-old Stevie Wonder. I was like, 11? I was like 9 at the time. I was like, oh shit, a dude same age as me making a record like that. To, first hearing the Jackson 5 on the radio, first hearing the Beatles or whatever. So music has always been, like I said, the opiate that sort of soothed me, nourished me, fed me, kept me moving, fed me literally, kept me alive, and has always been, on many levels, the most important thing in my life. Not as much now as it used to be, just because it's not my sole source of income and livelihood. But during key parts of my life, it certainly was. The process of artistry, of being around it, really was, and particularly the point where I was playing music. Because I was that kid who saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. I said, I want to play guitar, I wanted to play drums, but mom wasn't having drums in the crib at the time. She's like, no. It's funny because my little brother's a drummer, but when he wanted to play, so it was fine. So I got a guitar on my, 11th birthday, and I never was really any good. I could screw around a bit, but one thing that I was actually pretty good at, I always said that, I didn't make enough bread at the time to collect Picassos and Chagalls, but I could collect Gibsons and Fenders, Right. So I was a big fan of vintage guitars, earlier when JR was here and he was talking about how he'd re-signed with Slingerland, he and I were having a laugh because my younger brother and I, when we used to go take our music lessons, the music stores always had catalogs at the time for the various companies. And drum companies had, there were certain musicians who were signees to those companies. So it had all those things. So I'm a big fan of instrument companies, new guitars. So I collected them. I kept all my guitars with the thought in the back of my head that one day one of my kids may actually take an interest in it. And if you believe the stuff about how it skips a generation, that hopefully, my dad's vibe would get passed on to one of my kids. And my son, our son, whose name is Ellis, who's 24, is a bad musician. He plays anything he put in front of him, he can basically play it. And he's a guitar player, bass player, drummer, somewhat keyboard player. He's recently picked up the saxophone. And so he's the one who actually plays my guitars now. So my guitars have more or less become his guitars. So
nice.
It's cool.
JR said we had to, since you brought up his name, John Robinson, about the Ousters.
The Ousters. Wow. He really went deep on you, didn't he? The occupational hazard of the music business in the 70s and 80s at times were drugs and alcohol. And I'll say, for the sake of conversation, not to incriminate anyone else, but that I personally fell victim to a little bit of both at the time. Little bit being a term with, in quotes with an asterisk, depending on how you define a little bit. And Quincy we did a series of shows in Japan in 1981 and a series of shows here in America for Budweiser called Budweiser Superfest in 1982. Quincy didn't like to tour at that point, didn't want to tour. And I was able to, in the case of Japan, there was a distillery over there called Suntory that made us an offer we couldn't refuse. And when that happened, Budweiser also made an offer we couldn't refuse here to do the Superfest shows, which were stadium shows, which was Stevie, Quincy, Ashford and Simpson, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Aretha, a number of people. And Quincy basically cleared out the recording studios here. All the studio musicians that played on all his records, including JR, Louis Johnson, a bunch of others, Seawind Horns, Patty Austin, James Ingram, on and on and on, all went on the road together, to the point where, just as a sidebar, that there was he passed recently, a very successful record producer at the time, guy who produced all the hit Pointer Sisters records, Richard Perry. Got a call from Richard Perry one day, and he says, I understand that, Quincy's he's got to take his musicians with him when he goes on the road, but does he really have to take Greg Fillinganes? That was our reality. And some of the guys in the band, let's just say, partied a bit,
Sure.
after the shows. So, and they were, Ernie Watts, saxophone player, coined those guys the Outsters. And JR was one of the Outsters, and I suppose I was as well.
Sure. So we'll leave on this myth. Some people feel one has to use those, since we talked about the medicine part of it, coming in there to really get the stimulation. I got to get a vibe if I'm in a certain space, if I'm spaced out, if I'm high or whatever. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that?
I think it's bullshit. I really do. I mean, hearing that from somebody who did his share of partying, but I've been sober. I've been cocaine sober since 1984. I've been sober from weed for the last 14 years. I never really was a drinker, and I stopped doing tobacco about 5 years ago. I understand there's stimuli that, that one needs, but, when vices become habits, that's an issue for me. Habits that get in the way of your productivity, get in the way of your level of responsibility. And then also, doing what I ultimately ended up doing when I became president of a record company and dealing with some artists at the time who had addiction issues. You saw the real ugliness and downside of it. Unfortunately for me at that time, I was on the other side of the chemicals, a blow. But I don't buy. I got to get high because my playing's better when I'm high. No. Can I read something real quick?
Yes, absolutely. There's a little piece that he's working on. Got a couple of lines
along
here.
The lines of what you're saying.
Norman Mailer.
This is one of the essays from a chapter in my book. It's called "Can't You Fucking Read?" It was a typical Friday night for me in the late summer, early fall of 1981, fortified by the aperitifs du jour, tequila, marijuana, cocaine, tobacco, and women of questionable moral fiber, a.k.a. the wheel, all of which I indulged in wantonly and passionately. As a result, I didn't as much go to sleep as pass out in a crumpled, inebriated heap, dead to the world in an attempt to salve the throbbing pain of overindulgence wearing the guise of youthful pleasure. I had recently purchased a home in Tarzana, California, not far from the home where I grew up in Encino, a more or less typical mid-50s West San Fernando Valley ranch-style abode. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, pool, spa on a quiet suburban street. One of those anywhere Southern California domiciles often depicted in movies and television shows of the period. The particular allure for me of my clapboard/stucco nirvana at 18213 Rosita Street was the fact that the fellow that I purchased it from was also in the music business and outfitted one of the bedrooms with custom-built shelves on 2 of the walls to accommodate his and ultimately my 5,000-piece vinyl album collection. I had spent a better portion of my young life pilfering appropriately sized wooden planks and cinder blocks from construction sites to fashion as record racks, so to have an entire room at the ready to accommodate my fetish/passion/addiction was beyond satisfying. The previous owner had converted the original garage into a playroom, replete with a loft/reading space, and I immediately decided that room would become my master bedroom for its uniqueness, space, and in the nomenclature of the old MTV crib show, it was destined to be where the magic happens. There was a fixed bevel glass window that allowed me to look out from my bedroom to see who was at the front door virtually undetected. My neighbor was a wood craftsman and provided me with a custom sign that was mounted on the front doorbell. No solicitors or agents, quote unquote, to keep the uninvited riffraff away from my door with about a 50% success rate. The spotty effectiveness of the sign was clearly put to the test the Saturday morning after this Friday night of debauchery. Awakened from my substance-induced slumber, I bid adieu to my paramour of the night before as the sun rose, desperately in need of aspirin or some magic elixir to mitigate the massive headache that greeted the new morning. I plundered back into the bed, hoping to sleep off the remainder of the night before, swearing to myself, never again, never again. At approximately 7 a.m., there was an aggressive FBI, LAPD rap at the front door, followed by an almost cartoonish repeated ding-dong, ding-dong, ding-dong of the front doorbell, jarring me from my much-needed moment of peace. Rolling/falling out of bed, I made my way to the aforementioned bay window to see who or what had come to rouse me from my abysmal Friday night recovery, and there stood 3 people, 2 male, 1 female. Natalie attired in what can only be described as their Sunday best briefcase and periodicals in tow. I'd never seen any of them before, but I took them to be zealots/devotees of Jehovah's Witness, doing their door-to-door evangelism in attempts to recruit new members to their flock. Pissed off, I made my way to the front door, hell-bent on chastising these folks for ignoring the posted sign, respectfully asking them to solicit, evangelize, or recruit elsewhere. It's 7:30 on a Saturday morning. Didn't these folks have something better to do than wake up from his stupor and overserved party boy on a Saturday morning? What the fuck, dude? Making my way to the door in my tidy-whitey boxer underwear and oversized t-shirt, I barked through the door in my best Fred Sanford attitude growl. Who is it? Jehovah's Witness. May we have a moment of your time this morning, sir? I opened the door in all of my minimally clothed glory, pointed to the sign at the door and growled, can't you fucking read? It's 7:30 on a damn Saturday morning. How am I supposed to sleep with you knocking on the door like that and ringing at the doorbell like the house is on fire? Which clearly it is not. Do you know our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? Would you like to live in eternal paradise? Are you happy? Would you like to be saved? The woman asked me, stepping forward to offer me a copy of the Witness periodical Watchtower. No, I just want to get back in the bed and go back to sleep and get you folks away from my door as quickly as possible. Now, if you will, please. She persisted, and one of the 2 gentlemen who accompanied her stepped forward to continue the pitch. But, sir, do you really know God? And would you like to experience eternal life in paradise? He asked earnestly. Already agitated and standing there in my drawers, I cut him off and bellowed, Bro, get the fuck away from here. I don't want to hear this shit right now. The 3rd member of their triumvirate had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, standing erect, arms akimbo, staring straight ahead, averting and avoiding any eye contact behind Ray-Ban Wayfarer sunglasses, as the other 2 did all the talking. I took him to be a trainee of some sort in these door-to-door recruitment exploits. I focused my gaze towards him and was taken by the fact that he was wearing a dark suit and, curiously, because it was late summer morning and certain to warm up and get San Fernando Valley hot pretty quickly, a dark turtleneck sweater and non-leather black gloves. His outfit was topped off with a black fedora, brimmed down with just a smidgen of a jaunty, stylish tilt, with slip-on loafers of soft black leather. In essence, the fellow was essentially shrouded head to toe, with only a small portion of his face exposed. I quickly focused my attention back to his compatriots as their pitch, and the fact that I was standing before them in my undies was quickly losing its charm, so when I was politely asked if they could come inside and have a more thorough and detailed discussion, I was anything but polite in my response of, hell no, and please get the hell away from my door. I clearly caught them by surprise with my less than hospitable dismissive demeanor, and I guess that sheer power and volume of my response caused the 2 leaders to cower and retreat as they backpedaled as if blown backwards in a manner most often seen in cartoons. At that point, the mysterious fellow in the hat reacted in what was in no way a guffaw, chortle, or chuckle, but a high-pitched expulsion of sound of the tee-hee variety that was all too familiar of fans of a certain recording artist I was personally familiar with, and I responded accordingly. Smelly? More of that later. Dude, is that you? I asked, immediately upon hearing the laugh. He just stood there, gave a quick nod of acknowledgement with a sheepish, bemused grin, and placed his right gloved index finger up to his lips as if to say, you got it, bro. Now let's not make too much of this and we'll keep it moving. He said to the others, let's go. Turned on his heels and proceeded to move toward the sidewalk to carry on to my next-door neighbor's home to rinse and repeat, as it were. I followed them to the sidewalk. Yes, I gifted the universe, me and all my aforementioned boxer glory. When I looked up the block and about 25 yards away sat a gleaming in the sun burgundy-colored Rolls-Royce Corniche with a slight middle-aged black man who I recognized immediately as a former LAPD officer, bodyguard to the curiously suited fellow, friend of my father's and someone I had known for well over a decade, named Bill Bray, standing by, who upon seeing me standing on the street bellowed, I don't fucking believe it. Are you kidding me? And folks, that's the story of the morning that Michael Jackson and his Jehovah's Witness associates showed up on my doorsteps, offering me salvation from hell and damnation and the chance to live in eternal paradise, when all I wanted was to sleep off that week's edition of the Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll Chronicle. The end.
I love it. Thank you. Who would have imagined? Yes, we've heard those stories, but not so eloquently or detailed.
Thank you.
We've heard it from him himself, literally almost every aspect of the business. Ed Eckstine has not only lived the musician's life in terms of having his dad and his family so famous and still great hits that we listen to the day, as well as producing and managing and overseeing a record label that had so many great artists. But yet, and still, we know that although there's some controversy about the benefits of being high, or using marijuana, or using cocaine to really sort of feel the music or get more into it, and clearly, as he said himself, a habit can quickly turn into an addiction and become more of a problem than one can control and totally derail a career. I think a lot of that comes from people seeking to find that security within that has never existed. We call it self-love as something as simple and as corny as that is, dating back so many years, but for many artists, they may not be able to find it. Only trying to express it through the music, but internalizing substances to try to express it just simply doesn't work. As he says, that's bullshit. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Oh,